Found sanctuary in Santiago, Chile, where a colony of Brazilian refugees had settled. News of his successful adult education campaign had preceded him, and the progressive government then in power in Chile welcomed his help. The house behind me is where Paulo and his family spent most of the next 4 years. No plaque marks the fact that it was here where Pedagogy of the Oppressed was written, but his influence on Chile is still strong. We have met many who worked with Paulo during his stay. Almost all are still active as educators or advisors to non-governmental organizations. Their students apply his concepts of education in promoting social change. Marcela, tell me about your collection.
Okay, George, these collections of books are my personal writings given to me by Paulo during his time in Chile. Some of them were given to me by friends who worked with Paulo later in Geneva, in Switzerland. Some of them were sent by friends who worked with him at the OAS in the United States. Many of them were sent via airmail once they were completed by Paulo. But what I have here, and this is what I love most, is different versions, different editions from his different writings. So
and Pedagogy of the Oppressed was not his first book written here, I've gathered.
No, Pedagogy of the Oppressed was his second book. His first book was Pedagogy as, I don't know, it's la educación como práctica de la libertad.
That,
Educación como práctica de la libertad.
how would that, you translate that?
Education as practice for freedom.
Do you have a copy of that here?
Yes, I have.
Could you show it to me?
Yes, sure. I will show you first what Paulo gave us, my husband and me, as a present when he left the country. These are the first printouts of his book. These printouts are dedicated to us because when he left in 1969, he decided to leave Maria D. and Jacques the handwriting manuscripts of the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and he left us these prints of his first book. This was the first edition. This was sent to Uruguay to an organization that was run by the Catholic Church. Remember that David asked us yesterday what were the links between Paulo and the Catholic Church?
Yes.
They were very strong. We were saying that Paulo was a sort of disseminator, you know, of these philosophical, political ideas, and he transmitted them in a very simple, direct, empathic way. And this is important to understand because it was the particular political moment we were living. As Maria D. is saying, as Pepe Nagel told you, it's a sort of climate, a political climate of social change and empowerment, etc. And then he was able to transmit these ideas to a lot of people, to not to one or two or three intellectuals, but to very many actors in the scene.
And you were among those people who helped disseminate this.
Es decir, que Paulo producía, se discutía también con él. Yo diría que estábamos en las discusiones de la elaboración de eso también, ¿no, Marcela? Tú, yo me acuerdo especialmente. Pero después llevábamos a la práctica, llevábamos hasta el terreno, ¿no?
What Maria D. is saying, that yes, we were in charge of disseminating all what was produced together with Paulo, because that makes the whole difference. Paulo used to discuss with us what he was producing, and we were able to say what we thought of this, and then we were able to participate in the training courses with what we had discussed with him in different, on different subject matters.
Now he came from Brazil, which must have quite a different culture from your culture here. Was that a difficulty?
María, él pregunta si el haber venido del de Brasil dificultaba un poco las cosas con respecto a los chilenos que tienen una cultura diferente. Tú contéstase porque eres brasilera entonces.
Sí, yo diría que desde el punto de vista de Paulo no, porque es un hombre que comunica y aprende muy rápido una realidad. Yo creo que él sintió rápidamente la realidad chilena, la captó, nunca lo sentimos extranjero acá, ¿no?
Para que te puedas. Maria D thinks that from Paulo's standpoint, this was not a difficulty, because very quickly, he got involved and he got acquainted with the Chilean culture, and very quickly he could talk and interact with the different people. So she has the feeling that this was no problem whatsoever with him. Mm-hmm. I wanted to show you this book because this book is a very complex philosophical book which deals with critical consciousness and national reality. There is another volume which deals with what Paulo called naive consciousness and national reality. As you may understand, no human being in the world, any normal human being, could read this and work on it. But what Paulo did was to transform this into a sort of common sense speech, and to make these concepts available to a huge mass of people, both in Brazil and here in Chile and later in the rest of Latin America. So what I want to say with this is that there was a sort of accumulation of intellectual accumulation and of critical thought that was taken by Paulo and transformed into an educational speech. And this is very important because if you look at the other way around, Paulo brought to education different disciplines which educators didn't know: sociology, philosophy, psychology, anthropology, etc., etc. And I think that is a big contribution to educational thought.
Yo diría que Paulo nunca fue, es decir, nunca tomó la posición de profesor propiamente tal, ¿no, Marcela?
Yes.
Él era...
Hold it a minute. Maria D was saying that Paulo was never a traditional teacher or never worked in a traditional sense or was never the profile of the academic teacher. He had a different relation with students.
Sí. Y todo se pasaba como en un círculo.
And everything occurred like it was occurring in a circle. And,
discusión.
It was debate, it was dialogue. He asked for debate and he asked for dialogue.
Y las personas se sentían a gusto y nos sentíamos todos contribuyendo.
And people felt very comfortable and everybody thought we were contributing to the creation of knowledge.
And something, I get a feeling of it when I met him, that there was a kind of aura of warmth around him, but it wasn't an awe. Could you describe that feeling?
Well, there was an aura around him, but this aura was built throughout the years. I don't think that when Maria D and me and the other members in the team worked with Paulo, he had this aura.
Oh.
He was a very sort of straightforward professional, very much a peer. Even he integrated people like me, who at the time I was a student, so on the same basis as anyone in the rest of his team. The aura was built later. The aura was built when all these publications began to, sort of being taken by others, and he was considered an eminency.
And when he grew up long
And
beard.
yes, I always told him that he should take that away, but he never believed me. But anyway,
I think he enjoyed it.
But he never believed he was famous, and that is not something nice in him, because we say in Spanish, creerse el cuento de la fama. He was a very simple man. He used to write his letters in handwriting. He used to answer every letter you sent him. He used to answer to any request made by anyone to hold a conversation. And every time someone was saying, "Oh, Paulo, you are the finest man in the world, and the world couldn't live without you," he would say, "Hold it a minute, you are bothering the Canaries," or "Hold it a minute, you shouldn't say that. We're speaking among peers, etc." So, as Maria D says, he was the man who based his action upon dialogue and to a certain extent, peerage. Well, as I told you, Paulo always wrote to his friends. For example, we never lose contact concerning letters. I threw away most of his letters because at times you felt that someone could happen with them. I only kept 2 or 3, which I liked very much. But he never left an answer without a letter without replying that letter, and it always involves some serious discussion on educational issues. That is very important to consider because, and I think that to a certain extent, Maria D is an example, but he created a sort of community or group of reference, because if you look at it, you have the people from Chile, the Brazilians in Europe, which created IDAC, and then went with him throughout these African countries. Then you have another community that's formed by Mexicans and people at the OAS, which is Arturo Ornelas and others. And all of us also have a network. I mean, it's not just Paulo, you see. So Paulo is the axis, but all of them working with Paulo, and up to now, we are all friends, and we keep in touch. I mean, not on day-to-day basis, but when we need each other, we just knock the door.
Well, this area here is called Maipú. It's one of the poor areas in Santiago. It's a very large area, and it's divided. There's an area in the comuna that has more money, it's richer, and this poor area. And in this poor area, we have all these viviendas sociales, social housing, which are these buildings you see around, and they're tiny houses, an average of 35 meters squared, where normally there's families composed of an average of 7 to 10 people per house. So it's a very dense area in terms of population. If I'm not wrong, the amount of people in this around these organizations around of 180,000 people, and for which there are very little services, social services in terms of schools, hospitals, and has created a lot of problems. They're working on it though. We can see we have a brand new hospital, a brand new school, but the school doesn't have till 12th grade. It only gets till 8th grade. So kids, when they graduate from 8th grade, they have to move away from the area to finish their high school. So there's a lot of problems here in the area.
And so when these people come to learn computers, how practical is that?
It's hard to measure how practical it's going to be for each one of the individuals, because we have from kids of 8-year-old till adults of almost 60-year-old. And I think for each of them is try to open a little window or a door, a part of what they see every day. And for an adult, for example, a woman adult, mother of many kids, it's a kind of self-esteem thing that they can see that they can not only work cleaning a house, but they can learn how to use a computer. And for a kid, they have more access to a computer, which in their school they probably have very little or no access at all. So I think it's try to open windows to for the people. And
what about employment?
Employment is hard because nowadays computers is almost a demand to know. Together with 12th grade, they have to know computer skills. So it's almost something that every person that needs a job should have. And so in that aspect, we don't create false expectations of people coming to the school that they're going to be they're going to get a job for a guarantee. But it's going to be a tool in addition to what they know to maybe get a better job opportunity.
You mentioned that you have been studying Paulo Freire. How do you apply some of his educational ideas here?
What we try to do is for every computer unit the students are learning to relate that computer skill to their reality and what their problems are. And in the group, the group formed by the students of that class try to identify those problems and see what would be the possible solutions to those situations. And I think that's the basics and the base of what Freire tries to, of Freire's theories, and that we try to apply them to the computer school.
Do you know this book?
Yes, I know that book. Yes, it's a familiar book.
Well, several chapters are based on Paulo's experiences in Chile, and you were there.
Yes.
Could you tell me about that, how old you were and what circumstances, under what circumstances you met Paulo?
Okay. I met Paulo in ICIRA, the Institute for Agrarian Reform here in Chile. And when Paulo arrives there, he begins to make some questions about the way of to make communications to the land, and agrarian station to the peasants. And that's, in that moment, that question was very fundamental, because all our efforts was how to communicate with the peasants, but all the mental structures was different. It was the opposite.
Now, this was when your government was taking over vast portions of land and giving it to the peasants.
Yes, yes, that was the moment of the agrarian reform, and we had many people taking the land, but without instrument for working the land and for organize and for to set his word to the society.
Now, Paulo, in this book, describes, outlines experiences and conclusions he drew from what he calls encounters with the peasants and the extension workers.
Yes.
Could you describe those encounters? You must have observed them.
Yes, in the Institute for Agrarian Reform, our job was to make some training for the people working in agrarian reform, for the people of the institution who worked in agrarian reform. And then the problem was how to make that people makes his job very well, in terms of very well communications with the peasants. And when Paulo arrived, he said we can aprovechar, how do you say, we can take advantage from this kind of work for another thing. Puedo controlar español, porque quiero decir algo muy importante, y es que Paulo cambió el enfoque del trabajo, que era un trabajo de formación a los campesinos, en un trabajo de diálogo con los campesinos.
It says that Paulo changed the focus in terms of instead of working from above with the peasants, trying to establish a dialogue with the peasants.
Now, did he do that himself personally? Did he go out to country meetings and meet with the peasants?
Sí, yes. Con Paulo Se organizó un grupo de trabajo pequeño, éramos 5, que preparábamos, bajo la dirección de él, materiales que eran generalmente dibujos, láminas, y un conjunto de preguntas, y con eso íbamos al campo.
He says that Paulo organized at Isida a group of about 5 people, in which he was part, and they worked at preparing these slides, these pictures, that they were not photographs. They were pictures done by an artist, and preparing also some questions so that they would project the pictures through slides, and then...
But when he went with us to the land, really he talked, but during the first part of the meeting, and then we continued to work with the people. And in this moment, the dialogue was possible. For him, it was he was very interesting in the dibujos, como dicen,
the drawings.
In the drawings of the peasants. Of the peasants, and he analyzed very well the pictures.
Now, Paulo came from northern Brazil, a part of the country where he had a chance to work with peasants there. But the peasants here must have been quite different from those.
Yes, are different. Yes, yes. That is the reason why Paulo need to have some people working with him here in Chile, because there was many difficult for him. Their way of speaking, it was very different from us and from the peasants. His experience in the land was different. The way of reaction of the people was different, and then he need to work with a team of people from here, from Chile, and with a team very specialized in anthropology, sociology, education, etc. And that was our team.
Now, I have just seen some archival footage of land reform, but for the most part, it's scenes of officials coming out in automobiles with a parade of supporters and handing out deeds to peasants who stand up very almost frightened, and then you see a whole row of other peasants looking on, a bit bewildered.
Mm-hmm.
So it implies that all of this was kind of put on these people.
Pregunta si Paulo Freire vio esto y qué le parecía.
Mira, perdona lo digo en español, pero incluso cuando trabajamos varias veces los campesinos construían sus propios dibujos, y muy a menudo eso se reflejaba en los dibujos. Por ejemplo, teníamos, yo ya no lo tengo aquí, pero un dibujo muy típico de un funcionario de un organismo de reforma agraria pasando en una camioneta, levantando la polvareda, y los campesinos quedaban todos llenos de tierra. Y esa era su visión.
Yeah. So he says that did really happen, and they had peasants to draw certain things about their experience, and many times one of the typical drawings was to see an authority in a pickup going by, putting a lot of tierra, and that the peasants were looking at the pickup as they were all with dust. Yeah.
Y por eso a muchas autoridades no les gustaba nuestro trabajo tampoco.
So many authorities didn't like their work.
Our
because
work.
They were putting in evidence, what was going on through
Yes.
this system of having people draw things about their experience.
And so how did you deal with that? Because you were a young official who had to get the work done. Paulo, in this book, mentions that you were constantly being pushed by the need to speed things up that the country needed production, and the
agraria, los asentamientos, bueno, la productividad todavía no era muy buena.
Sí. Bueno, ahí había that was a political contradiction, no? Because some people in the government would like more production, and some people would like more organization, more popular organization. And that was a contradiction during almost all our work. At the end, produced a very big difference between the groups. The right and the left of the agrarian reform. Yeah. And it was very difficult to deal with that for Paulo and for us. Paulo had many pressures from authorities, pressure from authorities of the institutions for stop.
What was his official position?
What was Paulo? No?
Sí.
Paulo
La
was
posición oficial acá.
Paulo was a consultant of UNESCO and of FAO within the project of the Institute of Agrarian Reform. And he had many difficulties, bureaucratic difficulties, hidden. For example, with UNESCO, it was very complicated because there was many people there who don't like of the vision of Paulo Freire, and then hidden problems, etc. That was normal during the 3 years that he worked here. Yes, I think when we work in the agrarian reform, Paulo has some revolution really in two levels. In one level, in this level we are talking about, with the problem of the institution, etc. But in the other level, I think is the vision of the communication, the vision of the educational process, the vision of agrarian work, because by only one and fundamental difference, dialogue or imposition. Two ways, two different ways, okay? And when he said extension or communication, he was problematizando, how to say, he was problematizing the central idea of the agrarian extension, because the agrarian extension is based on the idea that we have a knowledge, sacred knowledge,
Sacred
knowledge communicated to some
Yes.
people who was below.
Yes.
And the idea of Paulo was no, sacred knowledge is not exists. The knowledge surge, nace, is born from the dialogue within some people, equal people. Okay, and that was, I think, the principal contribution of Paulo to the vision of agrarian processes of communication and extension.
Now, you have been in this business for a long time.
Yes.
You're still in the business.
Yes, I'm still in the business.
Do you feel that these ideas are out of date?
I think that these ideas are today vigentes, como dice,
They're still there.
is still there
Still
in many people working in the land, in many people working in NGOs, in many people working in a social organization. I think it's the same central idea. the dialogue, the democratic idea, the dignity of each person, the need of the participation in the society. Paulo said that in his own way. Today, another people is saying that in another way, but the central idea is the same. Paulo worked talking with the people, and this book is make it part by part. For instance, Paulo went with some of us to the land, and to the siguiente día, to the next day, he began to work, and then boys come to here and talking, okay? And the next day, Paulo, that was the mechanism of for the preparation of the book.
He didn't hide it.
Yes, yes.
That's great.
Okay, and for us it was really an excellent experience. For me and for my colleagues, I think that divide our life into parts. And yes, because we discover another way of to see our work, our relation with the people. That was the most important for me. ¿Cómo fue eso? Lo voy a decir en español. Paulo me impresionó como un predicador.
He impressed him as a preacher.
As a preacher. Esa fue mi primera impresión. Que hablaba de filosofía como si fuera una religión.
He spoke philosophy as though it was a religion.
Y que llamaba a la gente a actuar.
And who called people for action.
Y además muy simpático.
And very simpático, very sympathetic.
Con una personalidad magnética.
With a magnetic personality.
And for young people as me, that was very, very important.
It's interesting that you say that, and yet just in this book, he warns those of us working in the field against that kind of messianic image.
Yes.
He says we should not, you should not rely on that.
Yeah, dice que en el libro lo que Freire decía que a la gente que no deberían confiar mucho en una personalidad mesiánica. Pero era un mesías.
Pero sí, mira, voy a decir otra cosa ahí. He talk about dialogue. But in our sessions, only he talk. He talk.
En casa de Herrero, cuchillo en palo.
Claro. The methodology for dialogue was created by us, not for him, but the group. Because with him it was very difficult to dialogue, because he communicate, etc. It was very difficult for the peasants to understand the Paulo's ways of speaking. But I think the central idea was clear, and para ellos, for them, Paulo was a prophet talking about something very important, and with some disciples as who can explain. That was the structure of the communication.
I get a feeling that there is a great feeling of almost devotion to the memory of Paulo among you.
Mhm. Yes.
Is that pure nostalgia?
No, no, no. There is a component of nostalgia, I think, but there is too the sensation, the conviction of the contribution of Paulo for our development, personal development and social development. I think. For our vision of our work, our job, for our vision of the way of make education, of our vision of human relations. That was, for me, the more important thing. El legado, de algún modo, como decís, the heritage of Paulo is the principal heritage that the idea of the equal human relation, the dignity of the person, and the not communication from high to low, but the equal and fraternal relation between the people.